So, welcome everyone to the Healing Summit, Healing Ourselves, Healing Our World. I am very excited today to have Jason Engledoe with us to talk about his journey of healing and the profound work that he is doing now in the world. But let me start, Jason, with just giving a little bit of your background, your bio. Jason describes himself as a seeker, social permaculturist. I love that. We have to talk about that. And storyteller. But I would also say he's an amazing healer of both individual and collective trauma. So we'll talk more about that also. But he was born in apartheid South Africa and then left his birthplace in Cape Town at 17 in search of his own identity and truth, and traveled and was educated in 3 countries, Germany, England, and Taiwan, and has a diverse background in education, entrepreneurship, martial arts, international trade, and investment promotion. Certainly a Renaissance man, I would say. He now has returned to South Africa and been there for many years and is working to bring his skills in the areas of regenerative agriculture, social permaculture, depth facilitation, co-counseling, deep listening, authentic relating, and collective trauma healing. Jason is the founder of a compassionate listening circle for men and is in the process of creating a racial affinity group. It's profound what you're doing, Jason. Thank you for being a part of this summit.
Thank you. Thanks, Heather. I'm extremely honored to play a role in this summit, and I truly believe that the work of healing is so important in the world, especially where we find ourselves in our global context. My intention for participating is that even if there's something of value that I could provide to someone who is listening and or watching this summit, even if it's just one person, then I would have achieved my objective. So I am truly honored to be part of the summit.
Beautiful. Thank you. And talk a little bit, when you and I have talked before, you've shared some about your own experiences growing up, your own direct experience and understanding of ancestral trauma and collective trauma, which I know is part of now what shapes the work that you're trying to do in the world. But tell us a little bit about your own experience growing up in Cape Town.
Okay. So before I do, Heather, I would like to offer an invitation to those attending the summit and watching this conversation. And it is a practice that we use in our compassionate listening circles, co-counseling, deep listening circles that we facilitate. And instead of it being a cognitive experience, I hope the viewers would drop into their bodies, really an invitation to receive what I'm sharing. I'll be attempting to share it without shame, fear, guilt, or blame, but with respect in the context of this healing summit. And when I facilitate these circles, I further invite whoever is on the receiving side to try to withhold judgment and really to feel if there's a resonance with what is being shared, really to allow the perspective to land. I think there's so much value when we allow ourselves to listen actively and deeply, to learn from really the treasures of how other people have formed their worldview. So, and the intention of my work is really around regenerating Ubuntu. In South Africa, this is a Xhosa, and Zulu word, which has multiple meanings. And it's really an art of living that embraces human connectedness. I am because you are. And I just wanted to provide that context before going into my story, or part of my story.
Beautiful.
So, you know, as you said, Heather, when you read my bio, I was born in Apartheid South Africa in the 70s. And I'm not sure if it was coincidence, in my opinion, that it wasn't. It was the same year that we had one of the largest student uprisings in the country that would essentially change the history of our country forever. Um, those who might have seen an iconic image, really an image that is quite that still moves me of you know, a young man carrying the body of Hector Peterson with his sister just before he died, as you know, the police had opened live fire into a crowd of students just north of Cape Town. And you know, I'd actually forgotten. It's been my experience, you know, during conversations around healing, that, you know, sometimes people on the receiving end, or people who are listening and or watching, might be activated or re-stimulated. And that certainly isn't the intention. Like I said, I'm really wanting to share truth here, because I think that's one of the best ways forward as we navigate these challenges that we face today. So I see myself, as I see you, Heather, and everybody else, as a beautiful citizen of the planet, first and foremost. And I withhold the right for anyone to define, label, or classify me. But for the purpose of providing context, the system would probably describe me as a BIPOC person, Black, Indigenous person of color. And to understand the deeper complexity in our context in South Africa, where we have 11 official languages, yes, 11, and a beautifully diverse people. Part of the ancestral healing work that I'm currently doing, I'm putting together a family tree. And you know, this has been work that I've been doing literally over the past few weeks. And there have been some surprises in terms of discovering parts of my heritage. So on the maternal side, there's English, i.e. from England, and Irish. And then on the paternal side, there is white Afrikaner, or of Dutch descent. And then there's a big chunk that is missing, the unknown part. And so this is perhaps a story, if anyone who encounters South Africans, it's a story that is heard often, you know, the rich diversity. And part of my work really is to regenerate Ubuntu, to see how we could tap into that diversity and create opportunities for all of us, and truly become the rainbow nation that we are often called.
I mean, it's profound. You're embodying that sense of diversity and how we need to move, you know, as a global community beyond these ways that we separate ourselves from each other, or project onto each other, or create these polarizations, rather than truly. And part of what I love is that you so emphasize really listening and speaking the truth in an embodied way, so that we can come back into right relationship with each other in a way that is honoring our connection as well as our diversity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you know, the reason I'd mentioned the diversity in my own ancestral lineage, there's a growing study of epigenetics, and there are studies that are showing that we can actually inherit trauma from ancestors who have lived way before we have, way before our time. And the beautiful thing is that the opposite is also true, that we can also inherit the highest values of our ancestors, such as resilience, mental fortitude, and entrepreneurial spirit, hope, and service to others. But during my work, Heather, I can't but help reflect on what is the trauma that my siblings and I have inherited through our ancestral lineages. Again, the history of apartheid South Africa has been widely documented, and there's enough online to kind of find out the atrocities that happened during this time. But I can't help but wonder the trauma that has been inherited from some of my ancestors who might have been oppressors, some who have been oppressed. And I'd like to, if I may, share two anecdotes. One relates to a 4-month retreat, or rather a collective trauma healing course that I attended. And all of my grandparents, all 4 of them, had passed before I was born. And oftentimes when conversations with friends or other family would come to grandparents, there would often be quite a heavy sadness, because I feel like I might have missed out. And there was a beautiful moment during one of 2 immersion retreats that we did, where we did a meditation practice and attunement practice. And then we journaled around connecting with our ancestors. And in the journaling and contemplative practice that we did, we were asked to try to recall or try to receive, if we've never met our grandparents and we're not fortunate enough to hear stories about them, to really write down what we know about them. And then we went into triads, into breakout rooms, like everything nowadays is done online. And it's just wonderful to connect with these people from all over the world, from the west coast of America all the way to New Zealand. And one person had reflected back to me, a lovely lady from the United States. She said, it's amazing that even though you haven't met your grandparents, that you seem to know quite a bit about them. And I will forever be changed when the conversation comes to ancestry and our grandparents, because I wouldn't just revert to that feeling of loss and sadness. Now there's a feeling of really being fulfilled, really feeling like I have the support of these amazing people, the very people who gave me life. And I'd like to speak of another modality, ritual, rite of passage, that has been part of my healing journey. And many First Nations people, some in Africa too, do what is called a vision quest. And a vision quest, to my understanding, is when we go into the sacred mountains to cry for vision for ourselves and our community. Another reason to attend a vision quest, to my understanding, might be to let go of old narratives and ways of being, of old paradigms. So it was interesting. I had newly encountered the world of permaculture, and it was a dream of mine to start a small holding with my beloved life partner, Wendy, to start what we called a living learning center, a place where we grew our own produce in a way that mimics nature. So no pesticides and insecticides, no growth hormones and colorants. A way like nature does to embrace diversity, no monocultures and plowing the soil. So no destructive practices. And then to host workshops and retreats to share with other people this regenerative way of being. And in so doing, creating regenerative communities around that. So entering the vision quest, I thought I'd already known what my vision is and what my role would be for myself and my community. But what is interesting is after the 4 days and nights of fasting, drinking water only, we were in solitude out in the wild. We weren't allowed to make fires. We weren't allowed to bring tents. And as part of the all-night vigil, we needed to stay awake for the entire fourth night. We built for those who are not familiar with the vision quest process, I found it fascinating. We built our purpose circle or death lodge. And in the morning, as the sun rose, I stepped over the precipice. And then we'd gone back with the facilitators and with the group. There were about 6 of us, only 2 men, surprise, surprise, and 4 women. And before it was my time to share, I was overcome with this heavy, heavy mantle of grief and sadness. So much so that I could barely sleep that night, that I woke up crying. And the beautiful man, Lorenz, German guy who lives in the intentional community in Findhorn in Scotland, he reached out his hand and asked, are you crying, Jason? It was such a moving time, Heather, because I feel like I was visited by many of my family members who had already left the body, who had already passed on. And some that perhaps I didn't recognize because there's some that I've never met before. And that's when I realized that my purpose for attending that vision quest wasn't really to cry for vision, because I understood and understand what my vision is and at the moment, but it was really to let go potentially of my own trauma and ancestral trauma. So, this is just a story that I think I would like to share, and it might resonate with some of the people in attendance.
That's profound, Jason. And can you share a bit more? Because I think there are so many of us in different ways who hold that ancestral trauma. And part of what Christina and I talk about in our book, that's a part of this healing summit, is how, whether it's our own individual trauma or what we've inherited, how important it is to bring that into the light of awareness, because otherwise it's affecting us, it's binding us or blocking us without our even necessarily being conscious of it. So can you say a little bit more about what you understand about how we can work those issues that we inherit in our ancestral trauma to bring that into the light of consciousness for healing, for being able to let it go or integrate it?
So I would like to say up front that this work is, on the one hand, relatively new to me, but on the other hand, as I encounter these different rituals that really hasn't been a part of my culture or traditions and customs growing up, So there is a sense of knowing and a sense of familiarity and kinship with people who do practice that. And when I come to understand what traditions and rituals are available, they didn't feel as foreign as I thought they would. During the vision quest, for example, my beloved father, who was left his body 21 years ago. In fact, the timing of our conversation here, there couldn't be better because it would have been his birthday in exactly a week today. And you know, really having a conversation. I've gotten to know my father more posthumously than I have during the living years. And as you shared in my bio, I had left South Africa, at the tender age of 17. I'd come back for a period and then left again at 21 years old and spent most of my adult life living abroad. And even something as simple as having a conversation, during the sacred time in the mountains, I would see a rock and it would be an image that looks like a man. And I had the feeling that this rock could represent my father. And I, proceeded to have a conversation. And this has been, it sounds simple, but this has been a lengthy process of a lot of work over the almost 21 years since he's left his body. But it was one approaches it with respect and with humility. I did go through a process because I didn't perhaps think I had the storybook relationship with my father that I'd wanted to. And I had the conversation with him, and I'll share. It's quite something that, I haven't shared with many people. It's quite a private, sacred time, but I think the time for too much privacy, for me, we need to put that behind us. I think we need to share this work more openly, because I do think it's time that more of us become au fait with these rituals and start doing the work for our own healing and for the healing of our communities. And so I'd asked him I'd forgiven him for us not having the storybook relationship. But then it occurred to me, what was I withholding from my father? What was his idea of a storybook relationship? And so I also asked for his forgiveness. And this was a profound moment during the vision quest, which I shall never forget. The work that I've been doing recently, Heather, is putting together, as I said earlier, a family tree. And it's been amazing when I've picked up the phone and called up a family member that I've maybe not spoken with in a while, an older family member. The response of one I'll share said, when I'd said to him that I'm putting together a family tree, his response was, no, I don't know anything about that. And the conversation kind of ended abruptly. And for me, there was a sense, and I would later discover from hearing from other siblings, that there's a lot of trauma that had happened. I think it's part of the Four Noble Truths. Suffering is part of the human condition. And so I think that we need to have conversations, authentic conversations about this, so that we can normalize it and say it's okay to feel pain sometimes, even if we don't understand where the pain comes from. It's part of our own healing journey. So in closing, I hope I'm answering your question, I find that there have been many holes. I quickly came to a wall. I'm yet to find out the great-grandparents, but I've got a couple of leads, and I just feel that, we don't practice in our culture, we don't practice ancestral reverence. And I'd like to change that, because like I said, these are the people who gave us life, these are the people from whom we are able to tap into, especially in times that we find ourselves now globally, into that resilience, into that sense of community, into that hope, um, into that service for others, into that compassion. And so I feel like I might be healing the trauma related to the ancestry by giving them a name and a face again, by sharing with my nephews and nieces, with my aunts and uncles, grandkids, and going, this is where you come from. This is part of your identity. So this has been profound already, even though this work in terms of the ancestral healing has only been happening over the last couple of weeks, really. In the grand scheme of things, it's been happening over a longer time, but more consciously. These are the practices that have felt right for me.
You know, what's moving as I listen to you, Jason, is, and I find it and deeply moving to be in conversation with you, is that you really honor that process of connecting with the feelings that come up, connecting with your own embodied experience and how you may have inherited some of that suffering, some of that pain. And in letting yourself feel it and name it, then you're able to bring it into your awareness for healing, but that you're also really working with ancient shamanic practices that are really at the root of every culture, that are at the root of every spiritual tradition, that enable us to also honor that we can connect with our ancestors, with those who've gone before us. Even if they're in the spirit realm, we can still be in communication with them and in a healing process with them. I think it's profound that from that shamanic perspective, when we heal those issues that we've inherited or from our own life experiences, we heal forward 7 generations and back 7 generations. So in your courage in taking on that process, you're doing that for yourself, but you're also doing it for your ancestors and for your children and your children's children, which is really profound. And to me, part of what's so beautiful about what you're doing in your own process, but also what you're facilitating for others with these amazing circles that you facilitate, is that when we can really honor our own experiences and what we need to heal, then we're also not perpetuating that in our interactions with other people or allowing that to continue on to the next generation in a way that we stay in the trauma cycle. And that's really profound.
Beautiful. Yeah. You just jogged my memory, Heather, circling back to the collective trauma healing course that I'd done, as part of the one of the immersion retreats we did over the weekend. One of the participants had said, what about, yes, we do have ancestors from whom we have a well of resources that we can tap into. I'm learning that, and I'm going beyond learning that, and I'm actually actively engaging that well of resources. And but she also said, but what about us as living ancestors, as ancestors to the living? And I feel like this is an idea that really resonated deeply with me. And so I want to make a choice while I am in the living years in this body about how I'm going to show up for the next generation while we can still have the conversations face to face. And this is something that feels right. It feels right for me, you know.
Because again, that's establishing that healing template that
Mhm.
is allowing that to carry on to the next generations.
Absolutely. I mean, this morning, as part of the preparation for our conversation, Heather, this seems quite simple, but oftentimes the simplest things in life are often have the most profound impact if we allow them to. And I asked my mum the other day, what, can you tell me, a favorite song of one of my grandparents whom I've never met? I couldn't have this conversation with them. I would love to. And she shared a title of a song. I think the title is R.O.C, Keep Your Tail Up. Spike Jones is the singer. And it's an hilarious song, a simple, short song, and I listened to it often the last few days. And for me, I can almost sense my grandfather near me, and he's given me this gift, a reminder to not take life too seriously all the time, to look at the bright side of things, to never forget to laugh and to share that laughter. We listened to it together, Wendy, our dog, Chulo, and I this morning, and we had a bit of a dance. And I think that's one of the gifts, and this is a real example. And we can choose to practice it or not, but there are these opportunities to engage. And that's part of the healing, you know.
Well,
Um,
and yeah, and part of what you're saying is as we can face the trauma that we've inherited, we're also, as you're saying, embracing the resources and regaining that sense of joy, that sense of being fully in life, rather than, when we carry that trauma and it's unresolved, we're having to somehow keep a lid on aspects of ourselves and disconnect from life or from deeper connection with each other. So it really, as we let ourselves heal and feel all of what needs to come to the surface from the suffering, we're also embracing the joy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's something else. I'm seeing and I'm sensing a lot of polarization in the world. And there's a lot that happens, in the media, the things that I read. I try to disconnect from the media as much as possible for my own reasons. And but as part of a master's degree in eco-social design that I've been embarking on this journey with the good people at Gaia University, I first encountered an idea that the three memes of oppression, us as the oppressed, us as the oppressor, and internalized oppression, i.e., the feeling of not enoughness or negative self stereotypes, might be active in all of us. And this is really something that I would like to invite the participants of the summit perhaps to do as a contemplative exercise or a journaling exercise, to really try to write down how these means have been present in my life. um, and I bring that up because I think ideas like this do more to unite rather than further polarize us. Yeah.
Well, and it's really honoring that we carry all those facets of trauma within ourselves. And then we're not just identifying with our story as a victim, but actually reclaiming our empowerment and our wholeness. In terms of some of the process of healing collective trauma, I know in South Africa, I think it was in 1995 when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established by Nelson Mandela. And Desmond Tutu, who I had the amazing honor of interacting with a few times in the States, was
Lovely.
was leading that. It's extraordinary to me how that was a process of really honoring the collective trauma and the racial trauma that had happened in South Africa, and that it could not heal without people being able to sit and tell their stories. And ideally, people that had experienced the trauma were speaking to the perpetrators of the trauma. And that context of really hearing each other with the goal of then coming to deeper understanding of each other and reconciliation, and hopefully eventually forgiveness of each other. But I think in sharing the stories, then it also melts that polarization, because the perpetrators have their own trauma. And it's then when we get polarized, we just keep re-traumatizing each other rather than seeing that we're all, experiencing our own trauma in different ways. And when we can come and hear each other and see each other and be in relationship with each other, then we all can heal. And it feels like this is part of what you're really trying now, to foster in your own way in the circles that you do.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, Heather, because, for me, it's a validation that, let's talk about that a little bit. Though largely successful, and yes, you're correct that it was chaired by a Nobel Peace Laureate, the lovely Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Though considered largely successful, it ran over 7 or 8 years. But my question is it's both a question and a statement, really. 7 or 8 years of truth and reconciliation, the commission, but the trauma that existed, goes over centuries. My feeling that it's simply not enough. Based on conversations that I've had, I've been back in South Africa for 10 years now. I noticed that much has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. I feel like there's still many truths that have not been heard, and lots of reconciliation that needs to be had before we can truly move forward as a democratic rainbow nation. And this is the reason I feel called to this work, because I've been here long enough really to not to look at it from the perspective of someone who's left, but rather from the perspective of someone who cares deeply about being part of the change and really understanding after a decade of being back, whilst cultivating and growing a different worldview, which I think is really important. And this is why the next step is to put together, based on, some of the work that's being done out there, like people like Ruth King, the founder of the Mindful of Race Institute and the author of the book with the same title, that I'm wanting to put together this racial affinity group. And affinity here in this context doesn't necessarily mean liking or loving, or it means to understand. And it's a platform where we will use the practices that I've learned in co-counseling or deep listening, authentic relating, and storytelling, really to allow people to speak their truth, whilst co-creating a space with psychological safety, so that these stories don't get shut down. Because when people speak their truth, I believe we are releasing distress, tension, trauma, so that we can be more in touch with our good thinking and our natural intelligence, I believe, so that we can have a positive impact on ourselves, on each other, and on society. I think there's a lot of space still that requires truth-telling and reconciliation.
Yes, and I feel like you're working on a template for that where you are with the intensity of the issues that are still needing to be healed and resolved there. But it is, from my perspective, a template that we need all around the globe, because the level of polarization, the level of disconnection, hostility, violence is escalating. And I think part of that is because there's so much unresolved trauma that people carry individually and collectively, but also that we're in such a profound time of transformation globally, with which I think activates a lot of fear for people. And then those unresolved issues get pushed right up to the surface. And if we don't heal it, we will act it out, our trauma, on each other. So I'd love to hear. I mean, you and I have a shared vision of wanting to really support that development of the rainbow tribe, where we can,
Mm.
celebrate our diversity and our oneness, and be part of that new consciousness in which we can co-create a different kind of community and a different kind of world together. But share a little bit more about the racial affinity group and how you see that holding sacred space for that healing process.
Mm. I'd like to share. This is where I'm at. We've created a group on that is accessible by cell phone. People use different platforms, these chatting platforms. I don't want to mention any names, but there are many out there. And what's been interesting, I'd like to share a little bit about the process of putting this together. So I'm looking to get 8 men together, so 7 other men, including myself. I would like to facilitate the process using, like I said, deep listening and authentic relating, and it's been interesting, the reluctance for people to be part of this platform. There's an interest, but there's also a little bit of a resistance. And my sense, respectfully, is that there might be a reluctance to turn towards the darkness, that there's a lot of trauma and grief and pain. And whilst I was at a meditation retreat recently in noble silence, really a sacred time in the Vipassana tradition, a Pali Sanskrit word that means to see the truth as it is. And during this time, truths often emerge. In fact, the last one I attended last year was when the inspiration came to start the compassionate listening circle for men. Well, this time it was around the racial affinity group. And what came to me is that perhaps we need to engage. Not all of us have the privilege of having elders in our community. Some of us have lost parents or carers, caregivers. Some of us live alone. And especially during this time of social distancing. And like in our context, there are many people who have grown up without parents. And I just thought it would be interesting. If my dad was still alive, he'd be the man I'd approach to be an elder in the group, for us to hear the story from his perspective. Remember, we have the luxury of freedom in a democratic South Africa. Mom and dad didn't have that luxury. The sanctions were imposed. They couldn't travel like we could. And many other rights were taken from groups of people. And to engage these elders, it's been interesting. I've engaged 2 so far, and I sense a reluctance as well. You know, this work is not as prevalent as I would hope it would be. But this is the time that I need to exercise ego relaxation, in a sense. I need to go, remember, Jason, what your intention is. Be guided by the heart and by spirit and meet people where they are. So oftentimes, you know, I want to share with people the value of this work and that we need to take this journey together. We need to do it for the future generations. We need to do it for the earth. We need to do it for ourselves. But I realized I've been in this deep process myself for a number of years. And so I just need to remember sometimes to rein myself in and meet people where they are. So it's really going to be a platform. We'll meet online and a platform for people to share their stories. I'll give you an example of a story, if I may, Heather.
Yes.
So whilst I'm sitting in noble silence at the meditation center, about an hour and a half outside of Cape Town, a beautiful, sacred space, beautiful, sacred time to go inward and come face to face with ourselves. As I'm having a bite to eat facing the wall, because it's really a time to go deep, a white body walks past me, an older white body. And something emerged from my unconscious that I haven't really been aware of until that very moment. I just want to go back to a time where I lived in Taiwan and I studied martial arts with the beautiful grandmaster of feeding crane, Sifu Liu Chang-yi. And Sifu told us, you know, when we go to a restaurant or public space, when you sit, make sure that you don't sit with your back facing a door or window, because danger could potentially come from there. Always make sure that you're facing the places where danger could potentially come from. Now, circling back to today, well, the Vipassana meditation retreat, it dawned on me that, you know, an older white body who happens to be South African gives me a sense of discomfort based on the context. This system had created this. This is not something that I've just, you know, created in my imagination, because that's how it was. Danger could come during apartheid from the white man. And then I wondered, how was I unconsciously, how do I respond to that feeling if I think danger? And by the way, this man is beautiful. We had a wonderful conversation after we broke noble silence. Really a wonderful, wonderful man, but a wonderful lesson that emerged. And this is something that I would like to share, and I will share when it's my turn to share in the racial affinity group. So how do I show up when I encounter on an unconscious level danger, real or perceived? Do I get my back up unconsciously? Do I become aggressive, passive aggressive? Is there a desire for vengeance? So this is the kind of thing that we would unpack and explore these stories for the purpose of meeting with truth and normalizing and releasing distress, tension, trauma within the context of race.
You know, it's really powerful, this work that you're doing, because there, is that reality component of the trauma that is still taking place in the world. And yet you're also talking about those ways in which we can and have it re-triggered internally, because that need to be protecting ourselves. And yet it's only as we can sit in a safe and sacred circle to share those stories that we can begin to unpack them and begin to disassemble the ways that will automatically go into those trauma responses or those protective ways of trying to take care of ourselves, to be able to really see each other and hopefully return to right relationship with each other. So it's really powerful, the work that you're doing, which is about coming back into relationship, coming back into connection, speaking the truth, and really hearing each other, which, I know as a psychologist that we heal from trauma if we can feel seen and heard and held. Then the trauma isn't frozen inside of us, continually impacting us. It can melt and it can begin to heal, and then we can begin to, as you said, release our internal stress, but also our blocks to feeling safe with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But it's powerful work that you're doing, and help me, or help those who are listening, understand, how do you hold that in the context of a world that is still traumatizing, and that you're still in South Africa, where there is still a lot of that violence and trauma playing out in the moment? How do we hold that?
Gingerly is the first word that comes to mind. Tenderly, with respect for the work and the process. It's not easy, but it's necessary. When I'd come back from retreat, my beloved Wendy was driving down the main road to come to our home during, it was around 12:30, just afternoon, broad daylight. And someone had thrown a brick at the car. And this could have been fatal. And I was really coming from the sacred space when I heard the story. Before explaining how I'd felt, we called the police department and we got an answering service. What's one to do? It's the first time, Heather, in 10 years that I felt that perhaps it's time to leave again. But there's something else driving me. I'm an instrument for this work. My ancestors have my back. There are a lot of people whom I love dearly. There are people that I know who are leaders in their own right, of communities, of corporations. And if they're leading, I'd like to share with them a different perspective. I'd like to help bring some awareness so that they could have that multiplier effect, be more aware and conscious of the work that they're doing and how they're showing up in the world to complement. I'm not saying they're not doing their own, going through their own process, but just to complement that work. Yeah, there's a heaviness here, and I'm not quite sure if people know where to turn to. Leaders like Archbishop Desmond Tutu are rare. And so we need to become those leaders.
Oh, well put. Well put. You know, it's so moving to be with you and to hear your courage in holding that healing energy in the context that you're in. And you know, as I listen to you, some of my hope is that, you know, with your healing yourself, you're more and more holding this healing space for others, that as you said, then it begins to emanate out and affect other people. And I also, you know, part of what you probably know from my work is I hold this hope that if there are enough of us, even though we may be a minority, who heal and hold that healing energy, then we are influencing the collective consciousness. You know, it's that whole understanding of morphogenic fields and the work that Greg Braden and others did with the meditators who just sat in deep meditation, and it affected the area city and the level of violence and the level of social unrest, that it isn't necessarily that we have to all individually heal, but if enough of us hold that energy and really become, you know, hold that way of modeling it and emanating it, then it can begin to shift the collective and allow there to be more of that healing energy for all of us to begin to trust and begin to open our hearts and come back into healing.
Absolutely, absolutely, Heather. It's an empowering thought that inner coherence begets collective coherence and the opposite. So really, what's in it for us for doing the work? Well, we get to benefit and we get to impact the collective and vice versa. So even though this kind of work might be on the fringe, you know, Buckminster Fuller says, we don't create change by protesting the existing reality. We create change by designing and building a new model that makes the existing one obsolete. So really, the work of people like Otto Scharmer, MIT lecturer, the founder of the Presencing Institute and Theory U work, says, you know, it's time for us to learn from the emergent future. If the only constant is change, we are currently living in an era of rapid change. And I don't think anybody can deny that. Just look up, have conversations. There's a lot changing right now. But I find solace in work like the author William Bridges speaks of a transition model, and he says that change happens outside, but transition happens inside. And he says to begin with the end, begin by letting go the old. And then there's this neutral space. And we can almost anticipate a little bit of chaos and disorder, perhaps a little bit of dissonance, anger, resentment, sadness, grief, loss. And that's okay. And then to let come, to welcome the new, and to know that it will come, and just to continue to put one foot in front of the other. So, you know, Otto Scharmer says to learn from the emergent future. I've heard a story of the beautiful culture of First Nations in the United States, Native American Indians, who speak of the Red Road. You know, sometimes we find ourselves in the wood and the path has ended and we're alone, and it feels really scary. And then we need to carve out our own path, because it's okay to feel fearful, because there's no true courage in the absence of fear. And I'm also surprised when I've been on a mission to recruit more men into our compassionate listening circle. And I'm surprised by the resistance sometimes. I'm equally surprised when people say, oh yeah, that sounds great, and they don't show up. And I'd like to, I watched something very interesting, a docu-series recently that was around the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. And I'd like to say to the men who are watching this, we might think that talking about emotions, that crying is something that women do. But I'd like to softly challenge that idea because it takes courage and power to be vulnerable. This is the work of warriors. And so anyone who's interested, we meet at 7 p.m. South African Standard Time. It's free of charge. Perhaps you could grace us with your presence. For now, it's a men's circle. Wendy and I will be putting together a mixed gender circle very soon. Perhaps the next time we speak, Heather, that will be up and running. And don't take my word for it. Just show up and feel what that feels like. As Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. Your body wouldn't lie to you. Come and feel what it feels like.
Yeah. Beautiful, Jason. So as we end this amazing conversation, how can people be in touch with you to participate in this work that you're doing in some way?
So I am in the process of, disconnecting from social media. In the process of, as we're inundated by all this information, to actually disconnect and go, what do I think? What is my wisdom telling me? What is my intuition guiding me to do? And so sometimes we need to disconnect. However, I feel like if we're meant to connect, there is a link, I believe, under my profile, under my bio for, I do have a profile on LinkedIn and on Facebook as well. And I truly believe if we're meant to connect, like Don Juan said in Carlos Castaneda's books, we don't need to exchange phone numbers or addresses. If we're meant to connect, we will connect where we are meant to. So
that's a very shamanic understanding, Jason. That's correct.
I also, if I may, Heather, just share one or two more things. As part of this master's degree, I'd written a life and career review. It was a deep, deep process. And I'd written there, perhaps the very thing that we seek in life is the thing that we think we didn't have, in which case I need to become the mentor I wish I had. So I'm happy to say that just yesterday I went for police clearance. There is an actress from the United Kingdom, along with a cohort of people who put together a mentorship program here in South Africa to mentor underserved youth. And it's surprising on the one hand that many mentors are foreigners. Predominantly, mentors are women. And again, a soft challenge to any men in South Africa who might be watching this. I'd love to see you there. I think that if we approach it with humility, we might discover the awe of that experience and learn so much about ourselves. We simply must, we are connected. The sadness weighs heavy on our psyche and our spirit. We can't deny or be blinded or blind ourselves. we need to turn towards it. And we don't need to do it alone. We can do it together. There are resilient communities being built. And there's also in this process of recruiting Heather for the Compassionate Listening Circle, it's amazing how many times I'm hearing of people suffering from depression and anxiety. So I would like to share in an attempt to normalize, to say it's okay to not be okay sometimes. I went through a deep, dark night of the soul just last year, and some might call it depression and anxiety. And I used to wear it as a badge of shame, but I now wear it as a badge of honor. It has fundamentally changed me. It was a rite of passage. And there are some things that I learned from dancing with the darkness. And I'm the kind of person that I'd like to share that. So if there's anyone, again, I know there are people from all over the world watching the summit, partaking in the summit, listening to the summit. But even if ones want to connect from abroad and certainly locally, just reach out. No one need ever feel alone or unheard.
It's beautiful what you're saying, because we can't heal and we can't transform if we're not willing to journey into that underworld, to be in the darkness in order to return to the light, empowered, transformed. Thank you for all that you've shared today, Jason, because you also really remind me of that ancient Hopi prophecy and understanding that we are the ones we've been waiting for, that we need to have the courage to step into doing this work, to come back into connection with ourselves, come back into right relationship with each other, and then we can co-create a new world together. But I also am so grateful for how you've also helped us all to realize that we're being supported in that by our ancestors. We're being supported in that by our spirit guides. We're being supported in that by Mother Earth. So we're not alone in that process. We have each other, but we also have those other energies and planets and guides that are helping us, that are holding us as we all do this work individually and together. But thank you so much for being part of this today.
Thank you, Heather. I do, if I may just share one more thing. As Rumi said, what we seek is seeking us. So I hope that truth continues to find all of us. And I'd just like to share something from one of our group in our Compassionate Listening Circle. One man shared, if rather than making a decision from the head, as we often do, if we make a decision from the heart and we find out later that we've made a mistake, it's easier to forgive ourselves. So yeah, this has been beautiful, Heather. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Good luck with the book launch and with the summit. And I'm looking forward to checking out the other participants and the other conversations that you will have during the summit too. And I'll be sure to share it with all of my friends and family too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jason, and blessings to you and your work.
Thank you, Heather.